What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Traditional Press. Yes, indeed, we do not like the United Kingdom's Parliament. We want it gone. We don't think it's a good institution. We think it is negatively affecting our friends across the pond. The Parliament is not a healthy institution. The Parliament is an institution of corruption and repression and social progression to dehumanization. And this is one thing we cannot stand. Time to abolish the United Kingdom's Parliament. The reason why we want to abolish the United Kingdom's Parliament, of course, beyond the progressive narratives and the deconstruction of the health and vitality of an otherwise incredible nation, and a nation with incredible history, of which, of course, some of my ancestors derive their titles, including a beheaded Duke of Buckingham by the lovely Charles VIII, fantastic fellow, big fan, and other extraordinary and fun things that the United Kingdom has done. A wonderful place, beautiful, incredible history, the birthplace of Arthur, for goodness sake, one of the greatest historical figures of all time. Of course, we don't know how historical Arthur actually is, but I'm a believer, 100%. 100%. My brother just got back from visiting Scotland, where my sister lives, and they were standing atop Arthur's Seat, and it is a magical place. The United Kingdom is like nothing else on earth. Absolutely filled to the brim with castles and history, and unfortunately, a parliament. And a parliament, of course, is nothing more than an elected body, which is nothing more than representative democracy. And Parliament has directly contributed to the decline of monarchy around the world. In fact, if it weren't for Parliament, there would be no rebellion in the United States. It was because of taxation leveled by Parliament against the colonies that the colonies rebelled. It was not against King George. If you look at the powers that the monarch possessed versus the powers that Parliament possessed, it is 100% Parliament's fault that the United States rebelled against the United Kingdom. Now, am I happy we have our own country and government? Sure, fine, whatever. But it doesn't change the fact that I would have preferred that all of the loyalists amongst the colonists, that they were allowed to keep their money, keep their lands, keep their rights and privileges, and not have been ransacked by the Republican government that immediately took over and slaughtered tons of people in the colonies, including some of my family. Great. Love the Republic. Does awesome things all the time. Ever heard of Shays' Rebellion, by the way? Yeah, that was just another another uprising against unreasonable taxation that George Washington couldn't stand. That, you know, we always hear that the revolution was all about unreasonable taxation, and, you know, Parliament did unreasonably tax and otherwise encroach upon the liberties of us folks in the colonies, and then we get a new representative government here in America and the taxes double. Great. We would have been better off with England, literally. The taxes were way worse, the regulation was way worse, and Shay stood up against the new government, the colonies united under the Articles of Confederation, and said, no, you can't do this. We just fought a whole revolutionary war to stop all these taxes. And George Washington's like, no, 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 no. These are the taxes, and you're going to deal with. Representative governments are wonderful. We love them. They're the best. They do nothing but great things all the time. Wonderful. Absolutely great. Anyways, back to Parliament. The reason Parliament came into existence is, of course, because of the cycle of nations, which I have videos dedicated to that subject if you're interested. Absolutely fantastic, interesting, totally. It will upend your understanding of history once you understand the cycle of nations, because what happens in history is the elites in a country decide that they deserve the power and authority, and so they go and nix the king in whatever way they need to do that. Sometimes they do it gently, like they did in the original Parliament, but inevitably the king is always slain. And the same thing happened in England, in the UK. The current Parliament that we have today, of course, started in the 1700s. It began in 1707 following the ratification of the Treaty of Union by Acts of Union, which were passed by the Parliament of England, which the Parliament of England had its origination in 1215. But the Parliament that we have today is really nothing at all like the Parliament of the 12th century, or the 11th century. Whatever, the 1200s. I always say that wrong. That would be the 13th century and the 1200s. I always get them confused. Whatever, we're moving on. You can make fun of me later in the comments if you want. But the Parliament that was originally established in the UK in the 13th century was originally designed very differently. This was a system of councillors. It was a system of clergy and lay people. It eventually bifurcated into two parties, one of rich landowner elite class and one of the commons, of which knights and the burgesses were the original House of Commons members. And these folks in Parliament began basically almost as soon as Parliament came into existence, and of course this is all due to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta basically limited the king's power. The nobles stepped in and said, all right, Prince John, you're done. Stop being crazy. This is the Prince John of Robin Hood that we always hear about, the taxing and going absolutely nuts, the brother of King Richard the Lionheart, whom nobody liked and nobody will ever like. And so the Magna Carta was imposed upon him, and this was an instance of the nobles with the approval of the papal authority. They went and slapped down the Magna Carta on John's doorstep there and said, either you sign this or you die. And it limited the king's power. And so the nobles were actually partaking in their function, in their normal hereditary traditional function of holding the king accountable for his actions. However, they didn't stop there. And unfortunately, this is something that we see a lot in human history where people just go too far. And so the nobles got together and they said, from now on, forever in England, the nobles have the power and authority to depose kings. And this is a really big deal because it upends the top-down structure and it says, okay, the king who's supposed to be at the top now is actually inverted. So you have this almost hourglass shape where you have the elites at the top, the king in the middle, and then the vast swaths of commoners underneath. And this upends the triangular structure that we're supposed to have in a traditional monarchy and in a traditional social structure with our hierarchical understanding of the world, where the king is supposed to be at the very tip, the nobles are going to be in the middle here, providing the middle section of our triangle, and then we plebes at the bottom here are going to be the base of the triangle, holding the whole thing together, and we all work together in a geometrical shape that it really, really works. Well, sometimes in history, and this is usually what happens, a king messes up. He does something he shouldn't do, and the nobles have to perform their duty and go and stop him. And they did. And the Magna Carta in 1216 was this part of this whole thing. And or 1215. When the Magna Carta was signed, it changed everything for the United Kingdom and eventually for the United States, because the revolution in 1776 over here and on our side of the pond was not the first revolution of its kind. It was a follow-up revolution to the one that happened in England. So what had happened was Parliament gets involved. They say they have more power than the king, and what follows is a history of Parliament taking away powers from the king, all the way up until the final act of Parliament, which is the act of Oliver Cromwell, the great slaughterer and destroyer of worlds that he was, when, he was involved in, of course, in leading the English Civil War. That's a term that should sound familiar, Civil War there. And he led, of course, the High Court of Justice for the trial of Charles I, which inevitably resulted in the beheading of King Charles. And of course, this is, a complicated time in England's history. There's a lot of back and forth with different kings, with different religious perspectives and religious beliefs, and there's a whole Protestant Reformation going on, and so it's a very difficult time, but it doesn't change the fact that it's just the cycle happening all over again, because every time in the cycle, this is the same thing. Every time there's ever been a representative government, as soon as you introduce voting, the same thing happens every time. You have your traditional triangular structure, and the elites upend the structure. They make this like weird hourglass shape where the elites create a government that's by the elites and for the elites, and then either they keep the king or they just kill the king, and then that government of the elites, of the aristocrats, then goes and devolves morally into oligarchs. And these oligarchs, they only care about money. Their only virtues they have are the virtues involved in the making of money. And of course, the democratic man looks at the oligarchs and they're like, we don't love you. You guys are horrible. All you do is make money. All you care about is money. You guys don't care about us. We don't care about you. And the democratic man has even less virtues than the oligarchical man. And so there's this tension between oligarch and democrat, and eventually the Democrats begin to go to war against the oligarchs, and the oligarchs fight back, and then eventually the democratic man is like, we can't fight these guys because they have all the money and power, and so the only thing that we really have to be able to fight back with is our numbers. So they have to introduce more voting things in order to get more power to the people, and so they start trying to elect champions, and eventually the democratic man gets a champion, one single champion that goes and he wages real war against the oligarchs, and then the oligarchs fight back because they still have money and power and they can do all kinds of things. And so the savior of the democratic man goes back to the democratic man, and he's like, hey, I need more money and power. I need more. Give me more of your money and power, and I'm going to go and fight the oligarchs for you. I'm going to be your savior. And so the democratic man's like, you've done great things. Of course you can have more power. Take it. Go to war. Stop those filthy oligarchs and give us their money. And this man does this. And this relationship happens a few more times until this savior figure has all the money and power. And of course, he becomes the classic tyrant. And then he uses his money, it uses all of this power to tyrannize over the democratic man as much as he tyrannized over the oligarchical man, and a few million people probably die. Depending on what time period in history we're at. Some countries just didn't have 1 million people to kill. So a significant portion of the population dies under the tyrannical cycle. So that's the cycle of nations. Same thing's happening here. The Protestant Reformation is just spice into that that portion of the cycle. It's just part of the deal. But the Parliament then goes and kills the king. Not so great. Well, there's a whole thing. The son of the king, King Charles, he's able to come back into power after Oliver Cromwell's son proves inept and incapable of ruling. But Oliver Cromwell creates a republic, literally in the blood of the former monarch. And this bloody republic is very puritanical. They're not tolerant. They freaking ban Christmas. Literally, he banned Christmas. And he would tear down Christmas decorations if he saw them. Like, not a good time. Oliver Cromwell was not a nice dude. But anyways, he dies. His son is unable to take over this republic, and the elections stop, and the king comes back. And frankly, there was just such an enormous tradition of monarchism, because the common man at that time, they didn't really want tyranny. They're like, please, somebody save us. And so they go through this really fast cycle, and they come out of the cycle of nations. Oliver Cromwell is like, he goes from, there's the parliament, they take over the king, they're the aristocratic, all they do is care about money, and eventually there's a war, and they just kill this guy, and it just plummets straight into tyranny. Super, super fast under Oliver Cromwell. But it was building for a long time, ever since the Magna Carta. It was building. And after this whole cycle comes back, well, we get a king, but Parliament doesn't go away. And that's where things get a little bit weird, because the institution of Parliament remains, but then they have a king, but he's not really in charge of anything. He doesn't really have any powers. And even after they get their king back, Parliament continues to demasculate this position. Parliament continues to strip away all of the rights and privileges and powers of what it means to be a king. And as of today, unfortunately, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Warhammer 40K, which I've played a gazillion hours of that. He's sort of like the emperor in the Imperium. He's the corpse king. He doesn't really do anything, but he's necessary for the function of the empire. And it's a obvious satirical poke at the institution of monarchy in the United Kingdom that the creators of that game did, because literally the king right now is might as well be a dead body for all of the legislative work that he does, all of the judicial and executive work. He's just really not involved in doing anything. But what's fascinating, and I brought up this earlier, it was Parliament that abused the colonies. It was Parliament that continued to pass unrealistic and unreasonable legislation to target and wound the colonies. And the colonists always appealed to King George. They didn't attempt to appeal to Parliament because Parliament was completely unfriendly. And the one thing that King George could do was depose the Prime Minister. So he did this. Pretty much every time the colonists complained, he's like, well, I guess I'm going to get rid of the Prime Minister of England, of the Parliament, because that's basically all I could do. And it was never about the king. It's completely bogus. Most of the people in the colonies were loyalists. Like 70-something% of the people in the colonies were loyalists. It was about the elites just replicating the Oliver Cromwell revolution of England. This is the same thing. They were just following the same pattern, and the puritanical element in the colonists was just as strong. I mean, most of the colonies were puritanical colonies. And so the Cromwellian faction in the United States was very, very strong. So literally, they were just following in the footsteps of Oliver Cromwell. They weren't doing anything new or revolutionary, which is hilarious to use that term regarding revolutionaries, because this stuff had been done before, literally like a couple hundred years before. And so they had this example of what to do. No, this was 1650. So hardly any amount of time had passed between the establishment of the Articles of Confederation and the new United States government and Oliver Cromwell. About 5.1 million people were killed in England during Cromwell's revolution. Pretty much horrible. This is not a good time. And this history is how I am informed, in my opinion, of why I believe Parliament is an unhealthy and just awful institution. Not only do we see the things that they're doing today with all of this trans-humanism insanity and brutality, I mean, legalizing all kinds of horrible things. And now I know the break off of the Republic of Ireland is the one that legalized abortion officially. But if you look at the stuff that UK is passing, like, it's not a good thing that's happening right now. And this is to be expected. And we should expect another tyrant to come out of the parliamentary system, because it's this weird thing where like they have a king but not really, but then the elites are still in competition with the king. But the UK system is so funny. Parliament is such a weird institution. But we see that the more monarchistic a nation is, the better their corruption scores are, the cheaper it is to have a government. Because think about it, it's just simple math. We pay in the United States, our presidents about 430 some odd grand a year or whatever. Imagine we quadrupled the amount of money that we were going to pay the president. But then we fired all of the senators. How much more money would government have if all we were doing is paying? We could pay the president 10 times what he's getting paid right now and save literally, I don't know, maybe $1 billion in expenses with all of the election costs that taxpayers pay, all of the fees and crony capitalist deals that they make in government. I mean, it's just so much cheaper to have a king than it is to have a senate. It's like ridiculously cheaper, so much cheaper. And we see this everywhere, that you have a monarchy versus a pure republic. They all make more money at the end of the day than any of the average counterparts surrounding them. If you're in Africa, even the African monarchies do better than their neighbors. It's like Europe, Asia, Oceania, everywhere you want to look, monarchies perform better than republics. Republics are expensive. They're corrupt. They're crazy corrupt, because what happens is the members of parliament all make deals with each other, with governments, foreign governments. They make deals all the time. It's like their job is to make deals. And if all you're doing all day is making deals, why wouldn't you make a deal that benefits you? Even if the king was literally doing the exact same thing as parliament, so what? You now have 500 times less people doing this. It's physically impossible for the king to make as many bad deals as it is for parliament to do it. It's physically impossible because there's only one of him. And so the idea that parliament is somehow this healthy institution is just false. It was originally a government by the elites for the elites, but all of the power has been taken away from the elites. I mean, think about the power in the House of Lords today. I mean, do they even really have any power? They have like 3 things that they can do. All of the power and all of the government now takes place within the House of Commons. This is how Parliament works. All of the deals, all of the important things that happen, everything is House of Commons, House of Commons, House of Commons. House of Lords can do like 3 things. I mean, literally, like, they barely have any power today, and Parliament has consistently written legislation in order to take away the rights and privileges of the House of Lords. So today they are in full Democratic man cycle. All they care about is House of Commons, meaning that it's subversion, it's mutiny, and it's ungovernability that has pushed for the House of Commons. Because what happens is the common man looks at the elites and says, we don't love you. We don't want you. All you care about is yourselves and your money. We don't want you. So we're going to rule ourselves. And that's where the House of Commons comes into play. That's where the democratic man comes into play. And the tension between the democratic man and the rich, the oligarchs, is extraordinary. But the democratic man has fully beaten the oligarchical man in the United Kingdom right now. House of Lords is nothing. It's nothing. But what's absolutely fascinating, all of the members of parliament are rich. So that tells me that the oligarchical faction is very strong. They just don't care about any of the nobility stuff, which is old monarchy things. This is just the same washed up cycle of nations repeating itself, which means that unfortunately Parliament is going to go through the same problems as what we're going through today. We are basically electing tyrant after tyrant after tyrant over here. Like, we're going through some crazy election cycle where DeSantis and Trump are going to run for office, but there's no possible way they're going to win. I mean, come on, be realistic. But there's going to be people trying to vote trying to turn up, but 100% guaranteed Joe Biden is going to win the election. 100% guaranteed. But Joe Biden isn't even really the problem. The problem is who's going to come after Biden. And we're going to have full-on tyranny. Full-on. Millions of people dead, civil war, the whole 9 yards. And it's going to be a lot of fun because representative governments are so great. They never do anything bad or hurt anybody or cause any amount of civil wars. 5.1 million people dead in England. Nah, representative governments have never done anything wrong. No. It's just bad kings, right? Baloney. Anyways, that's what we need to do. We need to abolish Parliament and replace Parliament with its actual healthy alternative. Its counterpart is a functional nobility with jobs. They need to rule like they used to do, small, local lords over localities which serve under the king. I want to see King Charles come into fullness of life. I want to see him blossom into the best and most healthy king the United Kingdom has ever had, but more even than King Charles, I want to see Prince William and Princess Kate come into fullness of power as king and queen over the United Kingdom, because those two people are absolutely lovely. They're wonderful. And that would be a significantly more healthy alternative. So this is how the United Kingdom needs to go. For its best health, for less corruption, for better return on investments, for better standards of living, for a more healthy social world, for all of the good things that we want in life, for more beauty, truth, and goodness, and everything that you can want out of life, for more traditionism, we need to have the House of Windsor as an actual king over the United Kingdom, sans the Republic of Ireland, because they're gonna be in trouble. Yeah, they're doing okay right now, but they're a very young republic. What are they, like 100-something years old? They're gonna crash and burn, guaranteed. But it's gonna take a few hundred years because republics do usually. Anyways, King Charles, eventually King William. And then we need to have in the middle here, our crossbar, we need to have the nobles actually ruling and swearing fealty to the king. And under the nobles, we need to have democracies of small towns. About 5,084 people is about how many people in a town can participate in an actual democracy. And they can elect lord mayors, and absolutely guaranteed 100% for sure, there's like no wiggle room on this at all. The United Kingdom will have more money, it will do better, it will be less corrupt, it will be less immoral, and it will have a better chance at withstanding all forms of threats, both external and internal, and they will right their ship and do far better. And they have a better chance to do this than we do in the United States, because at least they have a king. They've got something that we don't have. And all my heart and wishes and blessings and prayers go out to the kings and queens of the United Kingdom and the people of the United Kingdom, of which my brother-in-law and sister and their beautiful child are a part. We love you guys in the United Kingdom. Thank you all for watching. This has been The Traditional Press. I'm Jonathan James. Stay strong out there, and I'll catch you all next time. This has been the Traditional Press Podcast. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for more traditional ideas and exploration of the why behind the what.